Here's the first part of your intense and unpredictable story. I sat at the dinner table listening to the clinking of glasses, the hum of expensive conversations, the laughter that sounded just a little too polished, a little too rehearsed. The kind of laughter that came from people who knew they were better than everyone else, or at least thought they were. I didn't belong here, and I knew it. But tonight, that didn't matter. Emily was in her element, dazzling as always. She had this way of pulling people in, making them feel like she was the most important person in the room. And tonight, she was. Her colleagues hung on her every word, executives and their sleekly dressed wives watching her with approval. She was playing her part perfectly. And then she turned to me. It was subtle at first. A glance, a smirk. The kind of smirk that held a secret just for her. The kind that used to excite me. Now, it just made my stomach turn. She raised her glass, the dim restaurant lights catching the delicate curve of her wrist. Honestly, she said, her voice dripping with amusement. How did I end up with such a loser? Silence. Then, laughter. The kind of laughter that seeps into your skin, settles into your bones, makes you feel smaller than you ever thought possible. Some of them hesitated, but then they laughed anyway because that's what people like them did. They laughed when it was safe to laugh. They laughed because they knew she expected it. I felt the air shift. I felt it deep in my chest. A pressure that had been building for months, maybe years. The worst part? She wasn't even looking at me. She had already moved on, sipping her wine like I wasn't even there, like I wasn't even worth watching fall apart. She thought this was her moment, but she had no idea. I leaned forward, setting my own glass down with a soft clink. The sound barely registered over the conversation, but she noticed. I saw the flicker of irritation cross her face. Just a flicker. She was too good at this to let it show for long. I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. The kind that wasn't really a smile at all. Then I spoke. That's a great question, Emily, I said. Really? How did you end up with me? She blinked, caught off guard by the ease in my voice. She had been expecting embarrassment, maybe even anger. But not this. Not yet. I picked up my phone, turned the screen toward her. A single text message displayed in bold letters. A message from him. Are you sure he won't be at the house tonight? The color drained from her face. The glass in her hand trembled just slightly before she tightened her grip. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. For the first time in years, Emily was speechless. The table had gone quiet. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. A waiter hovered nearby, sensing the tension but unsure if he should intervene. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. No response. That's not like you. You always have something to say. A bead of sweat formed at her temple. She reached for her usual weapons. Charm, laughter, control. But they weren't there. Not this time. Because this time, I was the one holding the knife. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The air felt different now, charged with something raw and electric. People were still holding their glasses mid-air, conversations frozen, eyes darting between me and Emily, waiting for the next move. Some of them shifted in their seats, sensing the undercurrent of something real, something that didn't belong in their carefully curated world of polished smiles and expensive wine. Emily's fingers twitched around the stem of her glass. She recovered quickly, of course she did. She was good at this. Years of navigating corporate circles, of knowing exactly how to manipulate a conversation, how to steer things back into her control. But not tonight. She exhaled, a short breath, and gave a small, practiced laugh. Wow, someone's been watching too many bad thrillers, she said, rolling her eyes. Come on, sweetheart, put the phone away. This is embarrassing. She tried to play it off, as if I was some paranoid, jealous husband making a scene over nothing. As if I was the fool in this situation. But she wasn't laughing. Not really. I leaned back in my chair, still holding up my phone so she, and everyone else, could see it. The text was still there, bold and undeniable. I watched as her colleagues glanced at the screen, brows furrowing, hands shifting uncomfortably in their laps. Are you sure he won't be at the house tonight? I said nothing. I didn't need to. The words spoke for themselves. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw tightening just enough for me to notice. I saw it in her eyes, the moment she realized she couldn't spin this into nothing. The second she knew that no matter what she said next, the damage was already done. And God, it was satisfying. I should have felt pain. I should have felt heartbreak, devastation, something other than the quiet, controlled fury sitting in my chest. But I didn't. Because this wasn't a revelation for me. I had known for weeks. Maybe even months. I had watched it unfold piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. And now here we were. I'm curious, I mused, tapping the screen of my phone lightly. Which part of this is embarrassing exactly? The fact that your boyfriend is asking about my schedule? Or the fact that you just got caught in front of all your friends? She let out a breath, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. She was calculating now, running through every possible escape route. I knew her too well. She was debating whether to deny it outright, to turn this around on me, to play the victim. But she didn't have time to decide. Because someone else spoke first. Wait, is this real? One of her colleagues, Mark, I think his name was, looked between us, his face pale, the realization settling in. The others murmured amongst themselves, their polished little world cracking at the edges. Emily let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. You're seriously doing this here? In public? Jesus, this is why She caught herself before she finished that sentence. But I already knew how it ended. This is why I lost respect for you. This is why I found someone else. This is why I cheated. I tilted my head. Go on. Finish that sentence. She clamped her mouth shut, furious. And that's when I knew I had her. She could scramble, she could deflect, but she knew. She knew she had lost control of the situation. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You know what, Emily? Don't bother. I don't need to hear it. Because I already know. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I placed it on the table in front of her, right next to her expensive wine glass. She stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. Divorce papers. Signed. Dated. Ready. Her breath hitched just for a second. But I caught it. I wasn't going to do this tonight, I admitted, tapping the envelope lightly. I was going to wait. I thought maybe I'd give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe, just maybe, there was something left to salvage. I let out a low chuckle. But then you called me a loser. And, well, I figured why wait. The tension at the table was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. The power had shifted so violently, so completely, that I could feel it pressing down on the entire room. Emily's eyes darted around, looking for an ally. But no one came to her defense. Not this time. She swallowed, reaching for her glass with a steady hand, taking a slow sip. Pretending she was still in control. Pretending she wasn't falling apart right in front of me. Then she placed the glass down carefully and met my gaze. And she smiled. Not a real smile. No, this was something else. Something sharp. She leaned in slightly, voice just above a whisper. You really think this is over? I felt the smirk tug at my lips before I could stop it. Oh, Emily, I murmured, tilting my head. It hasn't even started. The moment hung between us, heavy and charged, the space between our locked gazes feeling more dangerous than the words we just exchanged. Emily was good, better than most. She didn't crack, didn't lash out, didn't crumble under the weight of the attention now turned entirely on her. No, she sat there, shoulders squared, lips pressed together in the ghost of that infuriating, razor-sharp smirk. But I saw it. The flicker of panic in her eyes. The moment of hesitation before she'd spoken. She was reeling, scrambling, trying to decide her next move. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She reached for the envelope I'd placed in front of her, pinching the edge of it between her fingers, testing its weight like it might somehow change what was inside. Her manicured nails tapped against the thick paper as she dragged it closer, her movement slow and deliberate, as if she was still in control. As if she wasn't sitting in the ruins of a carefully constructed facade in the center of an audience that had just watched her entire world tilt. The restaurant was so quiet now you could hear the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. People at the surrounding tables had stopped pretending not to listen. The polite, wealthy patrons who normally busied themselves with overpriced appetizers and hushed conversations about their next vacation were now completely absorbed in our little spectacle. And Emily knew it. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and finally spoke. You think this makes you look strong? She asked, her voice as smooth as ever. Her fingers ran along the edge of the envelope, but she didn't open it. Not yet. You think humiliating me in public makes you the winner here? I smiled, slow and easy. Oh, sweetheart, I said, matching her tone. You humiliated yourself. I'm just making sure you don't get to pretend it didn't happen. The corner of her mouth twitched like she wanted to snap, wanted to spit something sharp and venomous in my direction, but she caught herself. This wasn't just a fight between the two of us anymore. This was a public unraveling, and she wasn't going to let me be the one to dictate how it ended. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She could deny everything, claim I'd faked the text messages, accuse me of being insecure, try to gaslight her way out of this like she had so many times before. But there was a problem. No one in this room believed her anymore. Not after the way her face had drained of color. Not after her very first instinct had been to recover, not deny. The damage was done. And I wasn't finished. I reached into my pocket again, and this time, I pulled out my phone. Emily's eyes flickered to it, just for a second, before snapping back to my face. I unlocked it and tapped the screen twice. The speakers hummed to life, and suddenly, the entire table was filled with the unmistakable sound of her voice. You're so much better than him. God, I feel nothing when I'm with him anymore. It's like being married to I don't even know, pet, a chore. You know? A few people at the table sucked in quiet breaths. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A single piece of silverware clinked against a plate. Emily's entire body went still. I watched her throat tighten as she swallowed. She knew what this was. She remembered saying it. And she knew what was coming next. I just wish he'd get it. Like, why is he still trying? He's so pathetic. The recording wasn't long. Just a few seconds. Just enough to shatter any illusions she might have been able to maintain. Just enough to make sure every single person sitting at this table, people she worked with, people she charmed, people she wanted to impress, understood exactly who she was. Exactly how she saw me. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. She just stared at me, something dark and dangerous shifting behind her expression. For the first time all night, she looked afraid. Not of me. No, never of me. She was afraid because she realized something. I had been planning this. I had been collecting evidence. I hadn't just caught her cheating, I had anticipated this moment. Prepared for it. And now she had no idea how much more I had. Slowly, I slid my phone back into my pocket and leaned forward, resting my forearms against the table, my voice calm and steady. I wonder, I mused, tilting my head, what your boss would think about that last part. Mark, the same colleague who had spoken up earlier, shifted slightly in his seat. His eyes darted to Emily, then back to me. His jaw tightened. Because he was her boss. Emily exhaled through her nose, a sharp, measured breath, and finally, she let the mask slip. She opened the envelope with steady hands, pulling out the crisp, clean divorce papers. She scanned the first page, her eyes flickering over the legal terms, the signatures, the proof that I wasn't bluffing. And then she did something that almost made me laugh. She smiled. Not in amusement. Not in mockery. No, this was something else. Something colder. She set the papers down neatly in front of her, folded her hands on the table, and tilted her head. This is cute, she murmured. I raised an eyebrow. Cute. She nodded. You always were so desperate to prove something, weren't you? There it was. The venom. The last resort of a cornered predator. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough that only I could hear. You really think this is enough to hurt me? She whispered. You really think you can win? I let out a quiet chuckle. Oh, Emily? I murmured, shaking my head. This was never about winning. She frowned just slightly. I leaned back, stretching my arms behind my head, and shot her the most satisfied grin I had in years. This was about making sure you lose. And for the first time in her entire life, Emily had nothing to say. Emily stared at me, the weight of my words settling over her like a lead blanket. The restaurant around us still hummed with whispers, stolen glances, the quiet clatter of silverware against plates. No one was pretending not to watch anymore. The show had begun, and everyone at this table, everyone in this room, was waiting for the next act. I could see it in her eyes. The way she was processing, recalculating, trying to find a way to twist this into something that worked for her. That's what she did. Emily never lost. She never let herself lose. But this time there was no out. I had made sure of that. She let out a slow breath and then, because she was Emily, she did what I should have expected. She laughed. It wasn't forced, but it wasn't real either. It was a performance, carefully calculated to make it seem like she was the one in control. Like all of this was beneath her. Like I was some sad, pathetic little man making a desperate attempt to regain some power I never actually had. She picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them leisurely, like she was browsing a menu. She didn't even look at me when she spoke. You always were dramatic, she mused, lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. God, you couldn't just handle this like an adult, could you? You had to make a scene. I tilted my head, studying her. An adult, I echoed. You mean like you? Sneaking around behind my back. Sleeping with some random guy in my house. Letting him text you about it like I was some kind of idiot. I watched her fingers tighten around the paper for just a second. Just long enough to tell me that had hit. I grinned. Tell me, Emily. When did it start? She finally met my eyes again. Does it matter? Oh, it really does, I said, resting my chin on my hand. Because, see, I know exactly when it started. I just want to see if you're stupid enough to lie to me again. Her mouth opened, then closed. I let the silence stretch between us before I sighed, shaking my head. No, nothing. Wow, you disappoint me, Em. I pulled out my phone again, tapped the screen a few times, and then turned it toward her. This time it wasn't a recording. It was a photo, and when Emily saw it, her face finally cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see the raw, unfiltered panic flash through her features before she forced it back down. The photo was simple. Grainy, taken from a security camera, but clear enough. Emily, in our living room. Sitting on the couch, legs draped over the lap of a man I'd never seen before. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the date. 3 months ago. 3 months ago, when she had been telling me she was working late, when she had come home smelling like a different kind of cologne, when she had started sleeping with her back to me. 3 months ago, when I had still believed we had a chance. Emily inhaled sharply, and then, because she was Emily, she straightened her shoulders, crossed her arms, and smirked at me. So, she said, voice low. You got a picture of me sitting on a couch. Big deal. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. Oh, Em. I love that you think this is the only one. Her smirk faltered. I tapped my screen again, swiped, and the next photo appeared. This one wasn't just her sitting on a couch. It was her kissing him. Her hands tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, their bodies pressed so close together it was impossible to mistake it for anything other than what it was. And then, before she could say a single word, I swiped again. Photo after photo. Emily sneaking a man into her house. Emily straddling him on the couch. Emily whispering into his ear, his hands gripping her hips. Emily walking around our kitchen in nothing but a shirt that wasn't mine. Each image timed and dated. Each one a nail in the coffin of whatever excuse she was about to spit out. And for the first time, finally, I saw something real on her face. Not amusement. Not arrogance. Panic. Pure, undiluted panic. She was losing. And she knew it. Mark, her boss, her mentor, the man she had spent years trying to impress, let out a quiet, stunned breath. Jesus, Emily. The murmurs around the table were louder now. Some people had the decency to look away. Others didn't bother. Emily's fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palms so hard I half expected to see blood. Then, suddenly, she pushed back from the table and stood up. I'm not doing this, she said, her voice sharp, controlled. She smoothed down the front of her dress, chin lifted high, expression unreadable. This is pathetic. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away. The restaurant doors swung open, then snapped shut behind her. And for the first time all night, I let out a slow, steady breath. I didn't go after her. I didn't need to, because Emily was running, and she had nowhere left to go. I sat there for a moment, watching the restaurant doors swing shut behind her, the last traces of Emily disappearing into the night. A part of me expected her to turn back, to storm in with some last-ditch attempt at control, but she didn't, because she knew. She had lost. The silence at the table was thick, filled with the weight of what had just happened. A few of Emily's colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances, some pretending to check their phones, others swirling their wine glasses, as if that would somehow erase the fact that they had just watched one of their own completely unravel. Mark, her boss, her idol, the man she had worked so hard to impress, sat rigid in his chair, staring down at his plate as if he could process what he had just witnessed through sheer force of will. He wasn't looking at me, wasn't looking at anyone. Just sitting there, gripping his fork so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I smirked. What's wrong, Mark? I asked, leaning back in my chair, my tone light, casual, like I was just another guy making small talk over dinner. You seem uncomfortable. His jaw twitched. I watched as he swallowed, carefully setting down his fork, his movements controlled, calculated, afraid. Interesting. I don't think this is an appropriate conversation, he said finally, voice low, measured. I tilted my head, studying him. Oh, I definitely think it is. Mark finally looked up at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was angry. Not at Emily. At me. And that's when it hit me. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head with a chuckle. No way, I murmured. He didn't move. But that reaction? That small shift, that moment of barely concealed panic, it told me everything I needed to know. I grinned. You knew. Mark didn't say a word. But he didn't deny it either. I let the realization settle over me piece by piece. Emily's endless late nights, the constant texts she never explained, the way she always seemed so sure she'd never get caught. The way she worshipped Mark, hung onto his every word, fought tooth and nail for his approval. Of course. Of course. You knew, I repeated, my voice quiet now, just between the two of us. And you didn't tell me. Mark let out a slow breath, carefully adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Like this was just another business meeting. Just another deal he had to maneuver his way through. It wasn't my place, he said finally. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Not your place, I echoed, shaking my head. Wow, that's rich. You sat there for years watching her lie to me, cheat on me, sneak men into my house, and you just, what? Looked the other way. Mark's jaw clenched. I'm not responsible for Emily's choices. Oh, you're responsible for something? I said, my tone sharper now. The question is what? Mark didn't flinch. He was good at this. That same corporate charm, that same effortless ability to keep control of a situation. But I saw it now. The way he had shifted when I showed the photos. The way he had gone stiff when I played the recording. The way he hadn't been shocked. Not even a little. And then suddenly I knew. I knew exactly why Emily had run. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, keeping my voice low, private, just for him. She cheated with you, didn't she? The words hung there, heavy, sharp, slicing through whatever pretense of professionalism he was still holding on to. Mark exhaled slowly, nostrils flaring just slightly, and for the first time that night, he didn't meet my eyes. Gotcha. I let out a quiet, satisfied breath, sitting back in my chair. Jesus, I muttered, shaking my head. You really thought I wouldn't find out? Mark's expression darkened. I think you need to lower your voice. I laughed again, louder this time. I need to lower my voice? Mark, buddy, you need to get a better game plan because this is pathetic. A few people at the table shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity battling with their discomfort. They wanted to watch, wanted to hear every juicy detail, but they also knew this was dangerous territory now. Mark clenched his jaw, his entire body coiled tight, like he was holding himself back from saying something he'd regret. But that was the thing. He didn't have a move left to make. Emily was gone. His secret was out. And me? I wasn't playing by the rules anymore. I reached into my pocket again, pulling out one last thing, one last little piece of the puzzle. Printed email. I slid it across the table toward him, my grin widening as his eyes flickered down to it. His own name. Emily's name. A string of messages dating back years, the kind of conversations that didn't just hint at an affair. They confirmed it. Emily hadn't just cheated. She had cheated with him. Mark stared at the email, his breath coming just a little too sharp, his hands tightening into fists. And then, finally, he looked at me. You don't know what you're doing, he said, his voice quiet, dangerous. I smiled. Oh, Mark, I know exactly what I'm doing. I leaned forward again, dropping my voice just enough that only he could hear me. You helped her cover this up for years, I murmured. You let her humiliate me, lie to me, make me feel like I was the problem. I let the words settle in, let them sink deep into his skin before I delivered the final blow. But here's the thing, Mark, I whispered, my grin widening. She ran tonight, and she didn't run to you. Mark stiffened. I saw the realization dawn in his eyes, slow and painful, like a knife twisting in his gut. Emily wasn't coming back. Not for him. Not for anyone. She was done. And just like that, I watched the last bit of fight drain from his face. I stood up, adjusting my jacket, exhaling like I had just finished a long, exhausting chore. Then, with one last glance at Mark, I smiled. Enjoy your dinner, I said. And then, without another word, I walked away. I stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a sharp slap, but I welcomed it. The tension, the weight of that entire dinner, everything I had been carrying for months, it was finally off my shoulders. Not gone, not yet, but no longer hidden. No longer buried under forced smiles and quiet doubts. It was out. And now I could breathe. I stuffed my hands into my pockets, standing just outside the restaurant, letting the city lights blur around me as I exhaled. Emily was gone. Mark had been exposed. And I was free. Or at least, I was supposed to be. So why did I still feel that itch? That lingering sense of unfinished business, like something was just slightly off, just out of reach. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past the dozens of unread messages and missed calls I had ignored all night. Some were from mutual friends, people who had no doubt heard about what had happened and wanted details. Others were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably people from the restaurant who wanted to gossip, stir the pot. But one message stood out. One from Emily. It was short. "You think this is over?" I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the screen. She had sent it 20 minutes ago, right before she left the restaurant. What did she mean? She had nothing left. No leverage. No way to twist this into something that worked for her. No control. Unless a car pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the night. I turned just in time to see Emily step out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she straightened her coat. Her face was unreadable, but there was something different about her now. Something settled. Like she had already decided her next move. I let out a slow breath, sliding my phone back into my pocket. "Well," I said, tilting my head. "That was fast." Emily adjusted her coat, smoothing down the sleeves like she wasn't standing in the wreckage of her own carefully crafted world. "You didn't think I'd just disappear, did you?" I raised an eyebrow. "That was the hope." She let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no amusement in it. "Oh, sweetheart, you really think you've won?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because I wanted her to keep talking. Because this moment, this carefully calculated performance meant she still had a card left to play. And I needed to know what it was. She took a step closer, lowering her voice just slightly, like we were back at that dinner table, locked in that silent battle neither of us wanted to name. "You think because you embarrassed me in front of a few people I'm just going to crawl away?" she murmured. "You think this is rock bottom for me?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I know it is." Her smile sharpened. "Then you don't know me at all." I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "Emily, if you're about to threaten me, could you at least be creative about it? Because I'm getting really tired of the evil ex-wife monologue." She laughed again, stepping even closer. "This isn't a threat," she said, voice softer now, deadlier. "It's a promise." And then, because she was Emily, she leaned in, her lips inches from my ear, her voice nothing but a whisper. "I will make you regret this." I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Because here's the thing about people like Emily. They don't say things like that unless they've already set something in motion. I let out a slow breath, turning my head just enough to meet her gaze. "Then I guess I'll see you soon." She smiled. And then, without another word, she turned, stepping back into the waiting car and disappearing into the night. I stood there, hands still in my pockets, my heartbeat steady. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt something else. The game wasn't over. Not even close. That I stood there long after Emily's car disappeared down the street, watching the glow of its taillights fade into the night. The city hummed around me, traffic, distant laughter, the ever-present buzz of a world that didn't stop just because mine had cracked open. I should have felt something close to victory. I had done what most men in my position never got the chance to do. I had exposed her, humiliated her. I had torn the mask off and let the world see exactly who Emily was. So why did it still feel like I was waiting for something? I exhaled, running a hand through my hair before finally turning away from the restaurant. I needed to clear my head. I needed a drink. Not the expensive kind they had been serving at that dinner, the kind that came in delicate glasses meant for swirling and sniffing. No, I needed something real. Something that burned. I started walking. No destination, just movement. And then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting another text from Emily, maybe some last attempt to drag me into another round of whatever this had become. But it wasn't her. It was a notification. A bank notification. My stomach tightened. I tapped the screen, pulling up the details. $35,000 transferred out of joint account. Recipient, unknown. The blood drained from my face. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, the city blurring around me. Another buzz. $15,000 transferred out of joint account. Recipient, unknown. My fingers clenched around my phone as the realization hit me like a freight train. Emily hadn't run. She had gone straight for my throat. I swiped to my banking app, my heart hammering against my ribs as I checked the balance. It was nearly wiped out. Not all of it. I had moved most of my personal funds to a separate account weeks ago, the moment I knew I was going to end this. But the joint account? The one we had both contributed to, the one meant for bills, mortgage payments, shared expenses? She had bled it dry. I sucked in a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Think. She had access. Legally, there wasn't much I could do to reverse those transactions. Not right away. The divorce papers were signed, but the process wasn't finalized yet. As far as the bank was concerned, she still had a right to that money. And she knew that. She had waited until the perfect moment, until I was distracted, until I thought she was licking her wounds, to strike back. Smart. I inhaled deeply, shoving my phone back into my pocket as I started moving again. My thoughts were sharper now, no longer clouded by the false sense of finality I had let myself believe in. This wasn't over. Emily wasn't the type to go quietly. And I had just given her a reason to make this war last. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a dimly lit bar, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of me. The place was nearly empty, a quiet dive tucked into the corner of the city where no one asked questions. It was exactly what I needed. I rolled my glass between my fingers, watching the amber liquid catch the light as I thought through my next move. Emily thought she had won this round. That I'd panic, that I'd get angry, that I'd make a mistake. She wanted a reaction. She wasn't going to get one. I pulled out my phone again, opening my email. There was one person I needed to talk to. My lawyer. I tapped out a message, keeping it short, direct. Emily drained the joint account. We need to talk first thing in the morning. I hit send, setting my phone down just as someone slid onto the stool next to me. I didn't look up at first, assuming it was just another late-night drinker. But then a voice cut through the quiet air. You look like a man who just got screwed. I turned my head, raising an eyebrow. The guy sitting next to me looked to be in his early 40s, sharp suit, expensive watch, the kind of effortless confidence that came with money and power. But his expression? That was amused. Like he had seen this before. Like he already knew. I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. You could say that. The man smirked, taking a drink of his own. Let me guess, he mused. Ex-wife. I huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. Not yet. He let out a low whistle. Ah, the fun part. I glanced at him, narrowing my eyes slightly. You sound like you've been through this before. His smile widened. Let's just say I know the type. I studied him for a moment. There was something calculated about him, something sharp behind the easy demeanor. He wasn't just making conversation. He was interested. And I had learned to be wary of that kind of interest. I took another slow sip of my drink, choosing my words carefully. Yeah? I said finally. And what type is that? The man leaned back slightly, tilting his glass toward me in a mock toast. The type that doesn't lose, he said. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Before I could ask anything else, he set his glass down and stood, smoothing out the front of his suit. Good luck, friend, he said, flashing me one last smirk. Something tells me you're going to need it. And just like that, he walked away, disappearing out the door. I stared after him for a long moment, my mind turning over every detail, every word. Because here's the thing. I had never told him her name. And yet, he had known exactly what I was dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every second of that dinner. Every move Emily had made, every word she had said. But more than anything, my thoughts kept circling back to that man at the bar. I had assumed he was just another guy who had been burned before, someone who recognized the look of a man in the middle of a war he didn't start. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. His timing, his tone, the way he knew. People didn't just know, unless they had a reason to. By morning, I was done questioning it. I needed answers. I sat at my desk, fingers drumming against the polished wood. The divorce papers still sitting in the same spot where I had left them. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer confirming our meeting in an hour. But there was something I needed to do first. I opened my laptop, pulling up my bank account. The transactions were still there, mocking me. $35,000. $15,000. Gone in the span of minutes. I had known Emily was going to retaliate, but I hadn't expected her to be this fast. I clicked on the transactions, scanning for details, but the recipient was still marked as unknown, which meant one thing. She hadn't transferred the money to herself. She had sent it to someone else. And that was interesting. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Emily wasn't dumb. She wouldn't risk funneling that much cash directly into her own account. It would raise too many red flags. But sending it to someone else? That gave her cover, a safety net. So the question wasn't just where the money went. It was who had it now. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Well, the man on the other end drawled, his voice thick with amusement. If it isn't the happily married man. I sighed. "Spare me, Adam. I need a favor." Adam had been a friend once. A real friend. The kind of guy you called when you needed help moving furniture or burying a body. We hadn't talked much in recent years. Not since I had gotten married, settled into the comfortable, predictable life Emily and I had built. But Adam? He had never been a fan of Emily. And he had never been comfortable or predictable. "Oh, this is already interesting," he mused. "What kind of favor?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice even though I was alone. "I need to track a bank transfer." A pause. Then, a low chuckle. "You really married the wrong woman, huh?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Adam sighed, but I could hear the grin in his voice. "All right, send me the details." I hung up and did exactly that, forwarding the transaction info within seconds. Then, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. My lawyer's office was exactly what you'd expect. Glass walls, sleek furniture, the kind of place designed to make you feel like you were in capable hands. "Bad news," he said as soon as I sat down. "You're probably not getting that money back." I exhaled through my nose, nodding. "Figured. She was smart," he continued, tapping a pen against his desk. "The bank won't reverse the transactions unless you can prove fraud. And since the account was still joint at the time, legally, she was allowed to withdraw funds. I had already known this. What I hadn't known was whether there was any move left to play. "There's one option," he said, leaning back. "We freeze everything else. Any remaining joint assets, any accounts that are still linked in any way, we shut it down before she can take another dime." I nodded. "Do it." He studied me for a moment. "She's going to fight this." I smirked. "She can try." He sighed, scribbling something down before looking at me again. "You know, I've handled a lot of messy divorces. And this." He gestured vaguely. "This isn't about money." I said nothing. "She's trying to win," he continued. "This is a power play. You humiliated her, so now she wants to make you pay for it." I already knew that, but hearing it out loud made it feel sharper, more real. "She can't touch me," I said. My lawyer hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "She might not have to." By the time I left his office, my phone was buzzing again. This time it was Adam. "You're gonna love this," he said. I climbed into my car, putting him on speaker. "Talk to me." "That money?" Adam continued. "It didn't go to a personal account. It went to a business account." I frowned. "What business?" He hesitated. "That's the interesting part. The account is registered under an LLC that was created 3 months ago." Something cold settled in my chest. 3 months. The same time frame when Emily's affair had really started. "What's the name of the LLC?" I asked. There was a pause. And then Adam sighed. "ME Consulting." The world around me sharpened, my vision narrowing as my brain connected the dots faster than I could process. ME Mark and Emily. I inhaled deeply, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Emily hadn't just stolen my money. She had used it to fund something. Something with him. Adam cleared his throat. "Look, I don't know what they're planning, but whatever it is, it's not small." No, it wasn't, because Emily never did small. And if she had just started playing dirty, then I was about to show her just how much worse it could get. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. My heartbeat was steady, controlled, but my mind was on fire. Emily had stolen my money, not just for herself, not just out of spite. She had moved it. She had funneled it into some shadowy LLC she had set up with Mark. ME Consulting. Mark and Emily. They weren't just screwing behind my back. They were building something. Together. And they were using my money to do it. I exhaled, tapping my fingers against the wheel, forcing myself to think clearly. Anger wasn't useful right now. Reacting emotionally wasn't useful. I had made it this far because I had been patient, because I had planned, because I had known how to push Emily into exactly the kind of position where she couldn't fight back. And she had known it. That's why she ran that night. But she hadn't run to hide. She had run to prepare for the next move. I needed to be ahead of her. I unlocked my phone, pulling up my messages to Adam. "Find out everything you can about ME Consulting. Owners, transactions, business dealings, I want it all." His reply came within seconds. "Already on it. Give me an hour." I smirked. Adam was good. He had always been good. And now, I needed him to be better than ever. I started the car, pulling out of the parking lot, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Emily had always been ruthless, always calculated, but this was next level. This wasn't just about ruining me anymore. This was about building something of her own. With him, that was the part that burned the most. Not because I still cared about her. God, I was so far past that. But because it was so insulting. She had spent years looking down on me, mocking me, making me feel like I wasn't enough. And for what? To run off and start a doomed little empire with Mark, the most painfully mediocre man I had ever met. It would have been funny if it wasn't so personal. An hour later, I was parked outside my apartment when Adam called. I answered immediately. "Tell me you have something." "Oh, I have a lot," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "You're gonna love this." I grabbed my keys, stepping out of the car and into the elevator. "Talk to me." "So, first things first, ME Consulting? It's not a real consulting firm." I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean there's no actual consulting happening. No client lists, no invoices, no services being provided. It's a shell." I stepped into my apartment, shutting the door behind me. "A shell for what?" "That," Adam said, "is where it gets interesting." I walked to the kitchen, setting my keys down. "Go on." "ME Consulting was registered 3 months ago," Adam continued. "But it's not the only one. Mark has another LLC. One he registered a year ago." My stomach tightened. "What's it called?" Adam let out a low chuckle. "Ever heard of MS Holdings?" My fingers curled into a fist on the countertop. MS Mark and someone else. But not Emily. Oh, this just kept getting better. "So let me guess," I said. "ME Consulting and MS Holdings are connected." "Bingo," Adam said. "Money has been moving between them for months. Small amounts at first, but then big jumps. And the kicker." I exhaled slowly. "Hit me." Emily wasn't the first woman he did this with. My entire body went still. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at the wall like it might somehow help me process this. "Mark had a pattern." "Explain," I said, my voice calm. Adam sounded too satisfied. "Before Emily, Mark had a business partner. A woman named Sarah. And guess what? They also had an LLC together. One that she put money into. One that he controlled." My pulse pounded in my ears. "And where's Sarah now?" Adam let out a slow breath. "Gone. Completely disappeared. She cashed out of the business, signed over her share to Mark, and walked away with nothing." I leaned back against the counter, gripping the edge, my mind clicking into place. Mark wasn't just some sleazy executive. He was a con artist. He was targeting women, pulling them into business ventures, making them invest, making them feel needed, powerful, untouchable, and then, when the time was right, he walked away with everything. And now Emily was next. I laughed. A low, sharp sound. She thought she was winning. She thought she was in control. And the entire time, Mark was setting her up to be his next victim. Oh, that was beautiful. Karma in its purest form. Adam spoke again. "So, what's the play here?" I smirked. "Simple. I let him do exactly what he's planning to do." Adam paused. "You're letting him scam her?" I grabbed a glass of water, taking a slow sip before answering. "Emily stole from me," I said. "She lied to me. She mocked me. She thought she could outplay me." I set the glass down, my smirk widening. "So now, I let someone better outplay her. And Mark? He had no idea that I was about to help him do it, that I had always thought revenge was something loud, something violent, something that required force and fury and an explosion big enough to make sure everyone saw it. But I had learned something in the last few weeks. Revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, calculated. It was a knife slid between the ribs while your enemy was still smiling at you. And Emily? She was still smiling. She had no idea what was coming. For the next few days I watched. I waited. Emily was predictable in a way she had never realized. When she thought she was winning, she got bold. Sloppy. She stopped hiding, stopped pretending, stopped being careful. And that's exactly what happened. She stopped blocking my number. Started sending me messages. Not to gloat, not exactly, but to remind me that she wasn't done. That she was still fighting. "You shouldn't have embarrassed me like that. You thought you had control, but you never did." I always land on my feet. It was almost cute how hard she was trying to convince me she wasn't scared. Meanwhile, Adam kept feeding me everything he found. Mark was playing his game perfectly. The money Emily had stolen from me? It was being moved, transferred between different accounts, different businesses, slowly being drained away in the same pattern he had used on his last victim. Emily thought they were partners. She didn't realize she was being set up. And I didn't stop it. I encouraged it. I had Adam send an anonymous tip to Mark's business email, something vague but just enough to make him paranoid. Your new partner is getting reckless. Keep your hands clean. Just a little push. Just enough to make Mark start thinking about his exit plan. Because that was the key. Mark never stayed. He built these partnerships, moved the money around, and then cut ties right before things got too complicated. And Emily? She was about to learn what that felt like. It happened 3 weeks later. I was sitting at home, sipping my coffee, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, you did this. I smirked. Then another message. Unknown number, I hope you're happy. I set my coffee down, exhaling slowly. It had finally happened. Emily had been blindsided. I already knew what I'd find when I checked. I opened my laptop, pulling up the business records. Emmy Consulting was gone. Completely dissolved. Mark had emptied the accounts. Every last cent. And Emily? She was left holding nothing. I leaned back in my chair, watching the screen with quiet satisfaction. Mark had played his role perfectly. Emily had stolen from me, and she thought she had one. But in the end, the person she trusted most had done the same thing to her. And I hadn't lifted a finger to stop it. The irony was almost poetic. Later that night, she called me. I let it ring. Then, after the 4th attempt, I finally answered. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. You think you're so clever. I smiled. I know I am. She exhaled shakily. You think this is funny? I tilted my head. You stole from me. You lied to me. You mocked me. And then you ran straight into the arms of someone worse. If that's not funny, I don't know what is. Her breathing was uneven. She was desperate. You set me up, she whispered. I laughed, low and slow. Oh no, sweetheart. You set yourself up. Another silence. Then finally, the truth slipped through her perfect mask. Help me, she said. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. Because this was what she never thought would happen. Emily had spent years looking down on me, treating me like I was nothing, like I was a loser. And now? She was begging me. I leaned forward, my voice soft. You know, Emily. I think I finally understand why you cheated. She didn't say anything. You spent all those years calling me weak, I mused. But I wasn't the weak one, was I? Her breath hitched. You were. I could feel the anger radiating through the phone. Screw you. I chuckled. Oh, Emily. You already did. And then, before she could say another word, I hung up. I slept like a king that night,